Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Okay, I'm
Good.
always okay until I read the news.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we look sometimes, we want the news, we want to analyze it, we want to find out what is true and false. And most of the time we find a lot of falsehoods out there, a lot of fake news. But today we have a few good things we want to talk about. I think we see a little bit of signs that maybe things are starting to change and move in our direction. And I'll have to admit that some of our concerns are true. I thought Fox treated me quite well yesterday, and I was allowed to talk about chloroquine, so I thought that was nice. The other thing is, before we get started, I wanted to just mention a couple things that aren't quite as positive.
Get the bad stuff out of the way.
We'll work on this one. This one just recently was posted by Zero Hedge, and this comes up about an Illinois state rep, and he has a solution for this. Well, I'm for this. Let's listen to it. He wants to abolish all history classes because they're all racist, and in the meantime, burn all the books and hold off on teaching anything because we have to get a new history to teach. Now that should give people, well, Illinois is not leading the charge for liberty, are they?
No.
He's probably from Chicago or something. But then there's another one that's, it's been in the news for a couple days, but to me it's so detestable because we saw, the Bible burning and flag burning, and that's been going on for a lot of years. People burned more flags than the Bible. They were burning bows and they were tearing up the place, and it was a lot of, I don't think they paid for any of this. It was not their property. They were demonstrating. But that was bad, and it's been around for a while, more recently. But the part that really is bad is that the authorities, who are supposed to try to maintain a little bit of order and protect property, they're part of the gang. Police stand off, don't do it. And the mayors will even join in, and they're part of it. So that tells you how big, the problem is that we have to face, because the authorities, who are the friends and who are the enemies. But let's go to something more positive. There was a poll, and the top headline says, the poll says, the skeptics are growing.
That sounds good.
Well, yeah, I think it's true. I think in my everyday activities, some that have been very, very frightened by it. And you can't say, well, don't be frightened, because people who are supposed to be telling us the truth are scaring the wits out of people. But the skeptics are starting to wake up. But fortunately, there's been a few people to help us make our case that have been skeptical from the very beginning. And of course, we keep citing Sweden. They were skeptical and didn't do it, and they're better off for it. So this is very good that there's a poll now verifying what we would hope to have happen. But already you hear the noise. People from the other side of this argument, they're almost like disappointed that there might not be any virus to fight. Where are we going to get a new virus? What kind of a condition that we have? I read one place where they were hoping that the hurricane would be very disastrous, so it could build on the corrupt or the problems that we have, and they were disappointed. Oh, it's not even going to hit hard, so we won't have another thing to complain about, another reason to stir up trouble and demand more government. So this is the whole thing. But you took a look at this poll. I think there's some good news there.
There is, and let's put up that first clip. And this is about a week ago this poll came out, and but it's worth mentioning, I think. And this is the percent of Americans, the percent of people who believe that Americans dying from COVID-19 is fewer than reported. On the left side is May 1 through 3, and the second is July 17 through 20. And you see a huge increase among Fox News viewers, and that's understandable. You see a very big increase about people who don't consume news, local and other news, in addition, online, social, a big increase in network, major newspaper consumers. The only place you don't see a big increase of people who are skeptical are CNN and MSNBC watchers. I think they might be brain dead and incapable of adjusting their worldview based on facts. But the number of Republicans who say that the death toll is inflated is up from 40% in May, now is up to 59%. So there's a lot in that. And, it's interesting because Forbes magazine wrote an article about this poll back when it came out a few days ago. And their headline was, "More Americans Believe Conspiracy Theories About COVID." So talk about being part of this fake narrative. The idea that somehow the deaths are being artificially inflated is a conspiracy theory. Well, when we have Dr. Burks herself saying, just count it all as COVID, count it all as COVID deaths. She's on record saying it. We know from Collin County in Texas and elsewhere in Texas that they redefined what was COVID. Everything's being put. How can it be a conspiracy theory? And there are so many examples of this being inflated. The other takeaway, though, that's a little bit more disturbing in this poll, and I think this is part of what they are trying to achieve with this narrative, 75% believe that other Americans are behaving in ways that are making the country's recovery from COVID worse. And 83% of Democrats, 75% of all people. So that means Americans are getting angrier at other Americans because they believe, hey, it's your fault. Yeah. And we're seeing people getting slapped, punched, even shot if they dare go outside without a mask by other citizens.
Well, it's even more encouraging when you think about the exposure when the major networks are out there all on the opposition. So the people who are changing their mind and becoming skeptical have to overcome the massive amount of propaganda that there is. And it might be the old saying, truth will out. The truth eventually wins on this, and maybe it's sinking in. And I think people are starting to realize being locked down, and they're not seeing much difference. They're not, running into thousands of people that are sick and all this kind of thing. All they do is get their information from the television. Now they're questioning it. But even Fox, I think, has transitioned a little bit. Is because it's always been said, CNN and MSNBC, they're the progressive, wild left-wingers, and they're still pretty consistent. But Fox, I think, is a little bit, I hate to use the term, but maybe a little bit more fair and balanced, because Laura Ingraham is getting good on this thing. And she's had, and of course Tucker's is good. And at the same time, there's some on Fox that still, they're still permitted to take the other side of it. So I would think this is good. But this is a positive for the American people. Once they get more information as time passes, it's sort of like what I always said about trying to prevent a war. It's hard to prevent it. It's usually easy to win the argument after a few years and say, when are they going to quit? This war doesn't work out. And this is more or less what they're saying here. This war on us and the war on virus is finally deciding, well, maybe this war was exaggerated, and it's time we go on and do something else. But the other thing I wanted to bring up today was a little bit about New York. New York has some things going on there, and one thing that caught my attention was I think it was maybe a visual on TV. I even watched The Enemy, at times. But that was a picture. I forget what street it is. I'm not familiar with New York City, but it was a glitzy street, the fanciest restaurants and things. Totally empty. No cars, no people, nothing. So you can't say, well, they deserve this and this sort of thing. There's a lot of people had invested a lot of money. A lot of people shopped there and did all these things, but it was totally empty. And what an extreme reaction to this. And this is something that anybody wanted to predict this even 6 months, 7 months ago, if it ended last year. It probably, the only time you really see the emotional aspect of New York City is true excitement on victories, and celebrations, whether they're sports celebration. But now nothing would be permitted. You can't celebrate.
Well, Black Lives Matter would be permitted.
Oh yeah,
don't forget.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I want to.
Speaking of
that, I have this little tidbit before I let you go at this. And this says New York mayor admits the city did not submit application to paint Black Lives Matter. Big murals. But they didn't think. I mean, why would you write laws for the politicians? You don't do that. But the mayor was a politician, but he was the one out there helping to put this ad up and this mural. But what I want to point out is when somebody sort of challenged them about this, because everybody knows that the laws are, to exempt the politicians. That's generally been the case. But this is what he said. De Blasio told reporters in July that he would not allow Blue Lives Matter and other groups to paint similar messages. He justified his decision. Why should one be treated differently than the other? And he said that Black Lives Matter represents a seismic moment in the nation's history and transcends the message of any one group. See, you divvy up liberty. You give somebody more liberty. Everybody's equal except some pigs are more equal than somebody else. And this is it. They're the pigs who grab their authoritarianism and exclude the other people. This is such an example. But you have to say, why do people in New York elect people like this? And one thing is, if they ever permitted secession or splitting up states, New York would be a pretty good state to split out.
Oregon too.
Like Virginia.
Yeah.
Virginia would be a good one too.
Sadly, that's true. It's amazing. And before we go to New York, I want to mention that just another Ipsos poll from today that just came out, because there's something else that's interesting. A new poll today came out, and I think my conclusion will be showing Americans are confused. 2/3 of Americans say that they are wearing a mask whenever they leave the house. Less than 50% of Republicans say that, but overall, 2/3 of Americans. But interestingly enough, the number reporting that they are self-quarantining has fallen to its lowest level since the start of COVID, only 17%. So the conclusion I would draw is that Americans at this point are figuring, you know what, I'm desperate to get on with my life. If I got to put this stupid thing on so I can at least get out of my house, I'm going to do it. I don't think that's going to last, but I think that's at least how I read the poll. But back to New York, and let's put on the next slide, because it's interesting. And I sent you this long article yesterday from the New York Times. And there's a reason. The reason to read the New York Times is the same reason that you would read Pravda in the 70s and 60s, because you want to know the party line on things, not because you want to know the truth. And to me, this is a kind of a triangulation where they realize that the tide is shifting. They realize a huge wave is coming, and they want to be out in front of it so they don't take the brunt of the criticism. And this massive article is about lockdowns. The title is "The Biggest Monster is Spreading, and It's Not the Coronavirus." And what they're talking about is how the lockdowns will be killing many more people additionally than would die than the coronavirus. So let's look at the next. This is the key paragraph, and I clipped it for you yesterday, Dr. Paul. According to one estimate, a 3-month lockdown across different parts of the world and a gradual return to normal over 10 months could result in an additional 6.3 million cases of tuberculosis and 1.4 million deaths from it. More than 500,000 additional deaths from illnesses related to HIV, and 770,000 additional malaria deaths. So we're talking over almost 3 million additional deaths that would not have occurred directly related to a lockdown that resulted in only 700,000 deaths.
And of course, the drug, which has been around for more than a half a century, has been used and efficiently used with tuberculosis, and has been helpful in the early stages of coronavirus, and that is chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine. They make it hard to get. I'm not even sure. And I suspect right now, because I did read the regulations, if I wrote a prescription for chloroquine, they'd say, okay, no, you have to fill out this form.
Yeah. You
have to have who's it going to, why is it, and when did they have a test, and this sort of thing, and making it very difficult. Of course, they'll say, I'll show you this other drug.
Yeah.
But tuberculosis has been really helped a whole lot when hydroxychloroquine with it. And it's not to say that they've made it all of a sudden unavailable, but it's made it worse. The fact that it's treated different, and it's the FDA. The FDA is supposed to protect us.
Yeah.
Protect us against a drug that's been around for 60 years. And we've had several physicians on this program to say, look, I've been using it for many, many years and have never had a serious complication and have had help. And a lot of people are arguing, that it's been beneficial. But this confusion, and now you add on to it, and now we're going to have more tuberculosis. viruses, and they're not even getting the normal amount of medications to prevent and treat tuberculosis.
Yeah, it's terrible, but I think they're getting worried, and I think that's why they're reporting it this way. The fact is the lockdown states and countries did not prevent COVID infections. They only delayed the onset, wasted an enormous amount of time and resources trying to do something that was impossible to do, destroyed economies, instead of doing what people always do when a virus breaks out, which is protecting the vulnerable people, using your resources to protect those people and allowing it to infect those that are not as vulnerable. In this case would be people under 50 years old in the U.S. But they didn't do that. And I think the biggest story of the week, of the month, is what we're seeing, what's happening to the great success stories of the early lockdown states. We're seeing in Hong Kong, we talked about it, all through Asia. All of the same people that were touting the great success in Asia of locking everything down are now curiously silent because it's coming back with a vengeance. Cases, not deaths, of course, cases. But let's look at the next one. Australia is a classic example, one of the most strict lockdown states. They were locked down, then they reopened. And then this article is from July 8th. Australia's second largest city heads back into coronavirus lockdown. This was followed very shortly thereafter by a couple of states, Victoria and elsewhere in Australia. Extremely strict lockdown. July 8th it started. Let's look at the next clip, Dr. Paul, because look, I've highlighted July 8th. So if the lockdown prevents the spread of cases, then why is Australia's chart look like that? Why did they only explode after the lockdowns? So instead of questioning the whole premise of locking down entire countries and communities, their point is, well, we didn't do it hard enough. And it's so insane that they won't question the basic premise of their approach. They continue to bank on this fake stuff.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it, and this shows, you know, the evidence there of what can happen. And the lockdowns just have not been helpful, but they continue to argue the same case more and more. I see it in economics and foreign policy. Failure here, failure there. Well, we'll do more and hit them harder. You know, there's some people who are still fighting the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
We didn't hit them hard enough.
Yeah.
You know, that sort of thing. So this is what's happening here. But still, I'm still believing that the people will wake up, because they might not understand the big picture of what liberty is all about. But when all of a sudden they can't walk out of their house without doing something to themselves, I think all of a sudden personal liberty means something to them. Maybe not in the theoretical aspect, but in the very practical, realistic. Why are they telling me to do this? I don't even know anybody that got really sick with that. Besides, what are the statistics showing? What are the odds of them getting it, and what are the odds of dying from it? And there's still, our local newspaper here, had a positive story today. It's going down, but they still won't separate the number of people who are positive versus the people who are sick versus the people who die. It's just false reporting. If you talk about fake news, we got a lot on here and a lot of bad decision. And of course, many times I've said that really annoys me that when there should be a discussion, or at least a chance for two sides of the argument to be heard in medicine, there's been nothing. There's too many examples in history where the medical officials have been wrong, gone in the wrong direction, and to correct it, and it's sort of like a cult. Once people accept sort of medical things there, to change is, oh, you're going to kill me, you're going to kill me, this sort of thing. So the doctors, and we have seen some doctors now stand up, and they can lose their jobs and everything else because they're standing up just to voice their opinion. I just happen to agree with them, but my argument is philosophic, and they have a right to present it. Why don't you refute what they say, and instead of just saying, well, we're going to arrest you and fire you because you're not talking the party line? And that's exactly what they're promoting. That's
exactly it. And a reminder, let's look at the next clip really quick. A reminder again of Sweden that did not lock down. Here's Sweden's deaths, almost zero. So everyone should have this burned into their mind.
Right.
But next, here's something I know that's near and dear to your heart, our dear friend and neighbor, Houston, with its wonderful mayor. Let's look at the next clip. Dr. Paul, you might want to say something about this. The mayor is furious. He wants people to get in more trouble for face masks.
Oh boy, it's just bewildering. You know why they do that. And, you know, there's a little bit of help. We've had less of the problems down here. We're 50, 60 miles from Houston, but it's terrible up there, and it's going to continue for a while. But eventually, I kept thinking when baseball season comes, they're going to wake up, but it didn't work. People are still rolling over, and I asked the kids, my kids said, a lot of them are baseball fans, they watch it, but I said, is it any different to you? I would never sit and watch anything too long. Is it any different to you that you're watching this baseball game and there is no audience, and the fake audience, they just think it's terrible, you know, and yet people do, you know, they're starting to do that. I see some of the younger kids are getting to go to the ball field and play outdoors. You mean I'm not going to catch the death of pneumonia or something like that? So no, I think that's great. The hospitalizations are down. The statistics are there, but they're bound to determine they have to win this fight. So they crack down. And the penalties are going to even be worse, and that to me is a fruitless venture, and it's a shame that it's our close neighbor.
Yeah.
Why do we not have a little more influence with our neighbors up there? But maybe it'll come. I think it's coming.
I think Mayor Turner is one of those that are determined to deliver Texas to Biden or whoever replaces Biden when they finally realize he's incapable of running. And I think that's what his goal is. It can't be simply the science, as they always say, because, and we have two other, I think, pretty demonstrative graphics that explain why all of a sudden he wants the police to go out and fine people $250 if they don't have a mask on. Of course, that puts the police in a horrible situation anyway. So the last thing they want to do is go, especially some minority communities, they already have trust problems, and they have to go, hey, here's a fine. But now he's a new draconian $250 fine, but look what's happening in the hospitals in Houston. Okay, here's the Texas Medical Center. We follow them because it's just pure numbers. This is their daily COVID-19 hospitalizations. You saw that it peaked in June. It's way down. In fact, they're having a problem of not having enough patients. And here's their prediction. Here's their survey of what the next 2 weeks looks like. Let's look at the next one. This is what they're seeing the next. It's cratering. Their bed occupancy growth is absolutely cratering at the biggest medical center in the world. The Houston Medical Center is the biggest. So when you look at these numbers and then you look at what the mayor wants to do to people, you cannot not conclude that this is about politics, not a virus.
Boy, but that's for sure. There's no doubt about it. And Trump's in the middle of it because he started off by talking about fake news, and I believe he was on the right side a month or so ago, but I also understand the position he's in. I mean, it is bad news when they come piling on and say, oh, you just want to kill people, then they accuse us of that. If you do that, and that's where this furor comes from. And they lose their minds. You know, they're actually delirious with hate because somebody didn't have their mask on, and they're not even talking logic. And so they must not care about the individual. I think they just care about letting somebody not have to go through what they're going through instead of saying, maybe I don't have to do it. And they don't want the statistic to show that if you didn't wear a mask, that they didn't get sick, because they don't want to say, you mean I did that? They don't want to admit they were wrong. You mean I did that all that time and I wasn't really any better off? You know, that's what they hate to do. But just as a bit of a disclaimer, you know, if somebody asks me, that means you're against the mask. No, I'm not against masks. I'm for voluntary decision-making with masks. I've worn a lot of masks in my lifetime, and it's just that this is a political thing. This is not a medical argument. And people who think that this is a medical argument alone, they're completely wrong. This is all politics, and I think it was orchestrated. I think Black Lives Matter, coronavirus, and the Federal Reserve have combined to bring us one of the most disastrous challenges to our economy and the world economy in the history of the world. And it's just beginning, and that's threatening. So that's why I'm urging people, let's wake up, because the truth is, if you do the right thing and do it with a precise conclusion, we can recover rather quickly. But right now, all we're doing is gathering information on why we should do it, and eventually, sort of that's the way some wars end. Just think of it. I keep referring to the 60s. All that tragedy, and finally it was overwhelmed. Our cities were being burned, and there was fighting, and all this going on, and finally they just cut it off. And I'm hoping that will be the case, but then there are days when you think they're not going to wake up. But I don't worry about the adjustment period. I worry about, the planning of the lockdown, which was politically motivated, some good guys and some bad guys. The planning of opening up is just as political. Oh, we'll open up this one, but not this one. Just open it up. One time somebody used an analogy that, it might be too radical. You should ease into going toward a free society. It's too disruptive. And the analogy he used was, well, if some guy came along on the street and grabbed you and he was robbing you and he was bent over you and beating the living daylights out of you, and somebody comes to help and you say, wait, just get him off gradually. No, we have somebody bearing down and damaging our economy and our liberties, and we need to get them off our back and quickly. If we can do that, I think the people will respond in a very favorable manner and get rid of this total dependency on a totally bankrupt government and a totally immoral government. They're not going to help us out of here. Only individuals with free will and free decision making and voluntarism can solve our problems quickly.
And maybe some of the people that are losing their minds might get them back if they see that. Well, I've got a couple of things to close out on, and you may want to comment on them. I don't know, but let's look at this next clip. This is a ethical skeptic who we follow on Twitter, and guys, I think he does very good charts. And this, I think, should be how we refocus what we're concerned about. And I'll show you the individuals, but this is the main. On the left is the demographic under risk of a medical facility visit due to symptoms of COVID. On the right is a demographic under risk of losing their home due to the COVID Great Repression. Let's look at that next one. This is the people that are at risk. Here's a map of the people at risk of a medical visit due to COVID. This is a heat map. It shows the intensity of the problem. This is the intensity of people at risk for a medical visit. Let's go to the next one. This is the heat map of those facing eviction 1st of August, 39.6 million Americans. So if you want to focus on that which will really destroy your life and the lives of so many other Americans, this is it. This is the problem. And I'm going to end with something because I think this really demonstrates more than anything the fact that the mainstream media is absolutely involved in a psychological operation against Americans. And look at this last one. This is the New York Times again, the Pravda of the United States. How to hug during a pandemic. This is a graphic showing people, well, you got to turn your head, you got to hug someone from behind. That looks like Joe Biden on the right. But, it's just insane. This would be something that you'd see in the Soviet Union. It's the craziest thing ever, Dr. Paul. And I don't know, frankly, if we can recover mentally from this. But I know all of you are recovering mentally because you're getting a good dose of skepticism, and that's what we try to deliver as well as we can. So we thank you for viewing. We thank you for your support for the Ron Paul Institute, which is the sponsor of this program, and we appreciate your viewership. Dr. Paul?
Yes, and following up on your point, this can be individual, but it can be generational. They're talking about the problems for kids, minor kids who have faced this lockdown, if even for a short period of time, and there's a lot of psychiatric and medical complications from this. But the problem is they think that it's a trade-off. We're going to put this on, and it's going to help, and therefore you have to do that. Maybe there'll be an economic downturn. But the whole thing is, which we've been talking about, is the lockdown didn't help, made it worse. And therefore, there's really no benefit whatsoever. You give up your liberties and you lose them, both the liberties and the benefits you're supposed to have. So it's sad, but I still believe that the only answer we have is doing our very best to understand it, to explain it, make it philosophic, make it moral, and make it voluntary. This whole idea that we can turn it over to the government, the authoritarians, the Faucis of the world and the Bill Gates of the world, believe me, it's not going to work. And I was pleased the other day when we talked about Bill Gates, on our website at least, there's not a lot of people out there that think Bill Gates is a great guy and a humanitarian. They really fear him, and rightfully so. So there's the positive people out there, but we're up against some great odds. But they're bankrupt. They're morally bankrupt, and they're financially bankrupt, and they're not going to be able to buy people's support and buy this influence just by either taxing or printing money. That's over, and that's why there's such a dilemma now on what to do with those tools. The tools will have to be, you can't all of a sudden bail out everybody that suffered from the lockdown. They've already tried it. They've spent $3-4 trillion already. And the only way they can bail out, if they really want to help people that have suffered from this, is get rid of the authoritarians who believe that they could just regulate us and tell us what to do. It would make us happy and prosperous and free. There is no way that's going to work. Only the thoughts of what it's like to live in a free society, which America used to be pretty good at championing. That is what we need. We need a heavy dose of liberty, and the people will recover quickly. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in again once more to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.